Sensory Trust is a national organisation. We're UK-wide and we promote and support inclusive design. And our concern really is that there are many people who don't have easy access to outdoor spaces. And that is particularly when you think about disabled people and older people. But what we've realised through our work is that a lot of the barriers that affect those people are equally shared by others. So if you think about somebody with young children and managing pushchairs, or you think about actually families and friends who go and visit places, they're equally actually impacted by the same barriers to getting around and enjoying a place. So if you're a designer and you're thinking, okay, I'm designing a space here, I can't actually just think about an average person. I'm having to think about people who have, for their primary sense, maybe they don't have sight or they don't have hearing. And what we know from experience is very often what it means is that what comes out as an end product, when people have really taken that on board, is a design that's way more interesting for people in general. And today I think we've almost started to pretend that we are just visual. But actually when you ask people about their strongest memories of place, very, very often what they come back with is a special sound, a special smell, something that really triggers the memory that isn't necessarily a visual recollection. An inclusive design means two things, I think, to us. It means technically making sure that places are accessible. That means people can get to them. It means people can get around them. So it means thinking of ramps as well as steps. It means thinking of accessible toilets. It means thinking, have we got some routes that are actually easy for people to get around? Are the surfaces non-slip and level and easy for wheelchair users and for pushchairs? And it means thinking about things like, if you are visually impaired, how will you know if you're approaching a set of steps? How do you know if there are hazards there that may be an issue for you? So there's a lot of technical detail that needs sorting out, and now we have legislation, we have DDA and we have Part M, and that's all helped a lot to define what those things need to be. But in our view, if people simply stick to the DDA, I think it has the danger that we end up with designs that treat disabled people, for example, as a specific group of people, instead of thinking that they are just part of the crowd. And really what we're doing is designing places so that whoever you are, whatever age you are, you can use and enjoy these spaces.
I think it's vital that architects and designers have input from people at an early stage like myself. Working from a rule book is all very well, but just because you've been taught how to make a door a certain width doesn't necessarily mean that everything else surrounding it will be accessible or even fundamentally inclusive, which is quite an important thing. Just simple things like the way light is reflected or the sound of something can be quite important to somebody with a sensory impairment.
To make a design inclusive is a real challenge and can probably seem overwhelming to try and think of all the things that you need to think of. But again, talking to people brings out the key things that you need to include, and also it helps you resolve some of the conflicts, because sometimes things that work well for one group or one particular range of disabilities actually work against another group. So there is a balance to be reached.
So the important thing, I think, behind all this is involving people in consultation. But in my experience, I've found that this can be quite a threatening thing for designers. And I think this comes from a slight misconception of what consultation needs to be. It's very easy for designers to think that what you're doing is you're getting a load of people in and asking them to actually design the thing partly on your behalf. And in our view, that really isn't what you're trying to do. The design skills sit with the designer. But the consultation is about bringing into play the different views that people have, the different ideas that they have for the experiences that they would want to have. And really what that does is it brings up a whole load of things that then the designer has the challenge of taking on board and interpreting through their design. We had a chance to do this recently with Eden Project in the design of their new Banrock garden. And what we wanted to do there was to say, okay, this is a new design here in the outdoor landscape at Eden. Let's involve a load of different people in generating their ideas, get those stitched into the design, and then bring those people back to actually get their response of, how did this work out and what did it create for them. So we set out some stalls full of materials, things that they could get hold of, different plants, different textures, and we asked them to just comment on these sort of things. And as ever, all sorts of interesting things came out and things that always surprise you. And one of the things was a person who uses a wheelchair who said to us, "I never get a chance to look down on people. I'm constantly looking up. And what would be great in a garden would be to have a chance that I could be the higher up one." So in the design of the garden, there is actually a raised platform that was partly put in there for that very reason, so that as a wheelchair user you could go onto that and get a higher vantage point across the garden.
When we first came to Eden, our first trip from the top of the hill down to the bottom, 2 of us came. I was in an electric chair and I had a friend who works with me in a manual chair. And the first thing that really got at us was the fact that as we came down the hill, there was a lot of very sharp drops down the side. And what we did then, we decided that, okay, we need to do something about that. So we came to the conclusion that using things like the offcuts of trees, the offcuts of stones, any stones that could be collected, could be used as a defence against going over the edge. And they've got little hedges now as well. So even if we went over the edge, we'd have a soft landing.
In the early days with Eden, I think we focused particularly on some of the technical issues. It won't surprise anybody who knows the site that it's quite physically challenging. And a lot of the issues for early visitors here was simply to do with fatigue and getting very tired going around the project. And that's particularly impacting older people. But also if you're a wheelchair user or if you're a very young child, these things are big issues for you. And we have strong memories of, in the early days, somebody carrying a tiny toddler, back to the car and just looking exhausted from all the effort. So we've put a lot of attention to things like transport. We've looked at how do people get to Eden easily. There are easy access buses now that directly link to the stations, for example. We've also looked at the on-site transport, and there's a land train that takes people from the visitor entrance right down to the bottom of the site and back up again, and that is wheelchair accessible.
The train's important to me because I can't walk the long distance, but if it wasn't there I would have to walk up all the paths, and the paths do get quite long and tiring because they're quite steep. And with the train it's handy because if you go down it's alright, and then when you're coming up, if you've just been skating or something like that and your legs are just dead, then it's cool because you just jump on and get on the way up, and then you've just got to walk a little way and then get on the car and then go home.
Now in more recent years we've had a chance to work with Eden on one of its big capital build endeavours, which is the building of the core education centre. And this was a chance really for us to get involved in the planning and design and all through the construction of that building. And when we did that, we really wanted to look at how do you integrate something like inclusive design into the whole planning system. So one of the things we looked at as a target was the way that people would move in and out of the building, and particularly in terms of emergency egress. Now with a multi-level building, you would quite often find that the emergency egress for a wheelchair user would involve going out to a refuge. And this is somewhere where you have a platform outside a door, and you would rely on someone from the rescue services actually assisting you to leave the building. Now in our view, although this is quite permissible with the legislation, in our view the ethics of this are kind of questionable. And we wanted to have a building where anybody using it would feel that they are entering and leaving it really on an equal basis. And what we've achieved then is really through the landscape architects and the architects working very closely together with the whole of the design team, was to look at quite creative ways of using landform as a way of ensuring that really whatever level you are on in the building, you are able to go in and out at ground level outside. Now we also have a lift in place, but the other thing that we've realised is that, and there are occasions when the lift does break, but if it breaks in this building, it kind of doesn't matter, because if you're a wheelchair user, you can get around the outside. And I think what we've realised from it also is that it's made for a more beautiful building. It's meant that there's a very nice integration between inside and outside. And really it's become something that's very equitable for different people using it. And you don't notice it. So that's the thing about inclusive design, I think, is that really it's kind of invisible that all this amazing effort and all this extra thinking and all this creativity has been put in play. Really what you end up with is just something that's better. We've been looking at some of the text interpretation and thinking, okay, there's 7 million people in the UK who don't have basic literacy. That's quite a big deal. And another million with learning disabilities. So a lot of people out there who can't access basic text. And what you'll see at Eden Project is a lot of pictures used to accompany text so that if you can't access the words, you've still got something that can give you some of the message. And we've taken that a step further and we've been using something called Widget. It's a system that uses pictograms, but it's very often used just for people with learning disabilities, and we felt that it would be great to mainstream it. And it means, for example, if you're somebody who comes in and doesn't have English as a first language, or you're dyslexic, or you just don't have that understanding of text, you still can get some of the idea of what the messages are that are being put out.
And of course, the Eden Project is a global garden, so we're showing different cultures and different communities, and it's really important in all our interpretation and everything that we do that we think of the multiculturalism in the UK as well. And we've got a few examples of where we've included a whole range of diversity in some of our exhibits, which is another really important thing.
One of the things that we've done in the Education Centre is to look at signage as a very important aspect of people finding their way around the building and finding their way to things like toilets and cafes. And with the signs, what you'll see is that they're designed to be very good contrast, they're very clear, but they're also really nice. And that's, again, the message, I think, with this work, is that inclusive design doesn't need to mean making things look dull. It doesn't have to be beige, it can be bright colours, and it can look great. And we've had a huge amount of feedback from visitors to say we really like those signs because we can find the toilets.
So inclusive design at Eden really means that we want not only people to have access to things, everything around the site, but we want them to enjoy their experience here as well. So an example of inclusive design in this particular biome is where we made some handrails which were intended to improve accessibility, but we made them out of material that would have been local to the Mediterranean, out of sweet chestnut, and they've turned into an absolutely wonderful tactile experience. So the handrail actually doubles up as not just as an access aid, it's also thinking about those other details and making things nice to touch. Another thing that's a particular thing of mine really is to do with seat heights. I'm not particularly tall, and the standard size seats I do not find comfortable, and I know a lot of other people don't. So what we try and do is create not just standard seats, we create them at different heights, and that's another really important thing to think about throughout the design process.
One of the best things I think about Eden has really catered for people in wheelchairs. The raised gardens are very special to us all because we don't have to bend down, we can smell them, we can feel the texture of everything, and it just having something real close to you that smells nice is really good.
Eden was recently voted top in the new Rough Guide to Accessible Britain in the Parks and Gardens section. And it's a really nice endorsement, I think, of all the work that's been going on here to make the place more accessible and more inclusive. And we all know there's way more that needs to be done, but I think it's been a real accomplishment in what has already been achieved. And something that's very important in that is recognising that inclusive design needs to thread its way through every single aspect of design and management of a place. And it's not something that simply gets done when something is made. It has to be there in the way that things are run. And a good example of that recently has been on the music sessions in the summer. These have been really successful, and we've worked with Eden to make sure that different visitors coming to those music sessions could have a great night. So we invited some people to come in as user testers, and this included people with assistance dogs, people with hearing impairments, people with visual impairments, wheelchair users, people with learning disabilities. And those people came to the sessions and basically shared their feedback on how it was for them and what sort of access improvements they would like to see. And as a consequence, we've been doing this for 3 years now, and the experience has become better and better. And there's a wheelchair accessible platform that's designed, and that was made larger so that more people could use it.
Me and my friends like come in here because they've got their sessions that like got a platform so like I can see over the top of everybody and like watch the actual session and have fun with it instead of standing down on the thingy where you can't actually see anything because you're shorter than everybody else.
The Eden project for me is really quite important. At its values, it has accessibility in place. They've been so forward-thinking in making sure that everything's accessible and consulting people like us at an early stage. And it means that I can now come to the Eden sessions or I can wander around the biomes. Basically, I don't have any access restrictions, and it means that I can come along with people that are able-bodied and I don't have to worry about any restrictions to having an enjoyment with them for a day out. The Eden project certainly is one of the most accessible places in Cornwall, and I think it's quite renowned for its accessibility and inclusiveness. There are many big recent developments that just basically have had the tokenistic approach whereby the people have been involved too late in the process. So I think the Eden project is certainly leading the way in the way it makes people with disabilities part of the process.